So welcome everyone to the Sadhguru Center Speaker Series. We're really excited to have you all with us today. My name is Tulsi Chase, and I'm the head of education and outreach at the Sadhguru Center for a Conscious Planet. So welcome to those of you who are joining us for the very first time, and welcome back to those of you who have been joining us from the very beginning of our speaker series and continue to be with us as our community grows. Can we go to the next slide, please? So for those of you who are new to our center and maybe learning about it or hearing about it for the first time, just very briefly, Sadhguru Center is a multidisciplinary research center based at the Department of Anesthesia, Critical Care, and Pain Medicine within the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, which is a Harvard Medical School teaching hospital here in Boston, USA. So we have, as you can see from the image here, a wonderful, diverse team of researchers and fellows and interns from all over the globe, joining us in our mission to enhance human consciousness, cognition, and compassion through education, outreach, and research. And joining us today to introduce our esteemed guest speaker is our director, Dr. Balachandar Subramaniam, who is an Ellison C.G. Pierce Endowed Chair of Anesthesia, a professor of anesthesiology at Harvard Medical School, and the director of our center. So, Dr. Bala, please do share a little bit about our talk for today.
Thank you, Tulsi. And it's been our pleasure and privilege to introduce Arnaud Delorme. He's a principal investigator in Paul Sabatier University, Toulouse, France. He's interested in studying in higher mental states, in particular, mind wandering and meditation. And Arnaud is actually going to take part in our conference that is coming up in October about science of consciousness, and he'll elaborate on this talk a lot more in this particular conference. He's also the chief architect of EEGLAB software for advanced analysis of EEG data. He's been acknowledged for his contribution to the field of EEG research by being awarded one of the 3 of the ANT EEG Company 10-year anniversary Young Research Awards in 2006, as well as a Bretencour-Shuller Young Investigator Award in 2002. I can't wait to listen to Dr. Delorme and take it away, Arnaud.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this speaker series. I was at one of the Sadhguru events more than 10 years ago in LA, inner engineering. So it's good to be back after all this time. And I know Sadhguru has always been interested in science and research. So it's my honor to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm going to assume here that most people are not necessarily familiar with mind wandering, although a lot of you are probably very familiar with mind wandering. So I apologize in advance if some of the things I say are too basic. So what is mind wandering? So here you have a person meditating, and there's all these thoughts that cross their mind. Did I remember to lose my belt? Oh, I didn't. Too late now. It seems like it's getting tighter somehow. Just ignore it. So all these thoughts that pops into one's brain. And that is what's called mind wandering. And as you have different types of chairs, you have chairs with footrests, forelegs, armrests, some with wheels, a back. So there's many different kinds of chairs. There's also many different kinds of definition of mind wandering. So there is people that think that mind wandering needs to be unintentional. Means that you don't want to have this thought, it just pops up in your brain. There's some that think that mind wandering cannot be stimulus dependent. So if you hear a sound in your environment and then it triggers a thought, it's not necessarily mind wandering. And then there's mind wandering that's task related. So it means like if you're washing the dishes, you're thinking about washing the dishes or not. So you have different classifications of mind wandering. So we're going to try a simple exercise here, and I'm going to do a guided short meditation of breath counting, and so we can see what is mind wandering. So take a comfortable position, and we're going to do a breath counting meditation, which means that we're going to count our breath from 1 to 10 every inspiration and expiration. You can keep your eyes closed, or you can have your eyes closed or your eyes open. And so let's get started. So take a deep breath in. And then a breath out. That's one breath. And then another breath in. Another breath out. And we're going to continue to do that for some time. And you might notice thoughts popping up in your mind. And when you do, just come back to your breath. Okay, now, gently open your eyes. And this was a very short meditation, but was actually one of the meditation teacher advised to do 2-minute meditation several times a day. So it's not necessarily out of context. But these are, for example, some thoughts you might have had, or I had actually when I was doing one of these experiments before. And as you count your breath, your mind, unless you're an experienced meditator, might not stay blank. Just things pop up in your mind. So you hear something vibrating on your desk. You wonder what it is. That's a stimulus-dependent thought. So that's a type of thought that depends on some external event. Then you have I had sometimes unstructured fragment of thoughts about future meetings. They were unclear. I couldn't remember very clearly. So these are we call spontaneous thoughts or unguided thoughts. And then I had another thought, okay, a few more seconds. What I write is boring for others to read, etc. What will people think? Because in this specific exercise, I was also writing my thoughts as they came in. This is a task-related thought. And then I had another thought, no thought crossed my mind for 10 seconds, that is strange. That's another task-related thought. So every time you have some kind of verbalization, it's a type of thought. And this is just to illustrate different type of thought. If we had some more time, I would probably stop the presentation and ask you, if you had some of these thoughts. A lot of you are experienced meditators, so you probably didn't have that many thoughts. I actually have an experiment we did in experienced meditators versus novices, where we show, the frequency of mind wandering. And I'm going to show you something about that. But first, let's see where mind wandering comes from, the research on mind wandering and the concept of mind wandering. And this can be traced to the monkey mind. The monkey mind is a concept that was introduced in Buddhism and Chinese philosophy. The first trace we have of is from Wenzheng Pian in 175 CE. And he said, for the understanding the mind monkey, the machination in the heart by 3,000 achievements, one becomes a peer of heaven. So it's through observing mind wandering that you can achieve heaven in this specific citation. And this is this was in China. This is a Buddhist representation, ancient Buddhist representation from India, where you can see mind, basically monkey mind. So sometimes mind wandering is referenced as the monkey mind in spiritual teachings. It's just the mind going from branch to branch, jumping without clear aim. Now, in modern science, the concept came back at the beginning of the century of mind wandering. For example, we have William James, which was a professor in Harvard at the beginning of the 20th century, that said, consciousness is in constant change. Now we are seeing, now hearing, now reasoning, now willing, now recollecting, now expecting, now loving, now hating. In 100 ways we know our mind to be alternatively engaged. And that's in the stream of consciousness that he wrote. This is when he was born, so it was probably in the beginning of the 20th century. And we had lots of things happening in 20th century, but really mind-wandering research started in the beginning of the 21st century. And there was several reasons for that. Reason number one, people started to be interested in internal state, and that came with what's called the default mode network. So default mode network, so people have been recording brain scan since the 1990s, so basically a decade prior. And before that, people were just, scientists were just interested in, okay, we present a stimulus, what's the response of the brain? So just behaviorist type response where we're just interested in seeing how the brain reacts. But then somebody noticed, well, when we don't ask people to do anything, there's lots of activity in the brain. And that's what's being called the default mode network. It's the default because that's what the brain reverts to when you're not asking anything. And in this, you have different areas being engaged. You have global monitoring in information integration, action consideration, stimulus value association, reward punishment signal, error prediction signal. So these are all different brain areas that are active when you ask people to just do nothing, basically. And what they're doing when they're doing nothing is they're basically mind wandering. There is some small distinction between the default mode network and what we can call the mind wandering network, but the same type of brain areas are involved in both. So here, this is the research presentation. And what's really interesting is to see how can you study mind wandering? How can you do control experiments on mind wandering? So you have some type of study which use reaction time. We'll see one of them. And when you use reaction time, so that's one measurement. You measure how fast can people respond. And that tells us about mind wandering or not. If you're mind wandering, you're not going to respond as fast. Then we have physiological measurements. So that's EEG, electroencephalogram, fMRI, that's heart. Any kind of physiological measurement can inform us about mind wandering, pupil size as well. And then, so these are the objective measurements. And then we have the subjective measurements. And we'll talk about these as well. It's subjective measurements is if we ask people, are you mind wandering right now? Or we ask people, just press a button when you think you're mind wandering. So this is the difference between self-caught and probe-caught. So I'm going to show you some experiments before I show you some results that mind wandering researcher do to study mind wandering. So this is the first task where you can imagine being in front of a screen and you see a number one at a time. And you have to press a button whenever you see number 3. You have to not press a button whenever you see number 3. So whenever I see 9, I press the space bar. 3, I don't press the space bar. So that's basically the task of the subject. It's a very boring task. Every time you see a number, you press the space bar, except for number 3. You don't press the space bar. And what it does is that when you're mind wandering, you forget not to press number 3. And we can study the brain activity when you forget. oh, I had to, here, you don't press the space bar when you, oops. So that's the one. So this one is called the STAR task, sustained attention task, where we show these numbers and the instruction is don't press on number 3. And basically, whenever you're distracted, you're going to press on every single number. You're not going to notice number 3. So this is a very popular task in mind-wandering research. And when you forgot to not press on number 3, we know you're mind-wandering. Now, there is another type of experiments you can do, and this one is called self-caught mind-wandering. And in this one, I just asked you to count your breath up to 10. And basically, whenever you lose the count, you're going to press a button. So here, we imagine you count your breath, 1, 2, 3, 4. And at some point, you're going to ask yourself, okay, what's the next number? I forgot what's the next number. And you start thinking about work, etc. And then you have what we call a meta-awareness event, where you're like, oh, I'm not counting anymore. And then you start counting again. And the instruction we give to people is, if you are struggling to find what's the next number and trying to think about what's the next number, just press the button indicating that you were mind-wandering. And these are self-caught mind-wandering, and we call them self-caught because the person catch themselves mind-wandering. They don't have instruction others than, okay, when you notice you're not doing the task, just press the button indicating that you're mind-wandering. Now, in these tasks, we can also, at random time, we can interrupt the task and ask people either through a microphone, it's automated, of course, we can ask them, are you mind-wandering right now? And then they answer yes, no. And these ones are called probe caughts, in the sense that we have a probe and they are asked to answer to the probe. So we have these two methodology for people's introspection, where either they self-pace, they do the task, and whenever they realize they're not doing the task, they press a button, or we interrupt them at random interval, usually every minutes or every minutes and a half, we interrupt them and we ask them if they are mind-wandering. So what about results? So let's look a little bit at results we can obtain with this methodology. So this is here, for example, we use functional near-infrared spectroscopy. So this is how it looks. And we looked at the SART task. So the one where you have the free and you're supposed not to respond on number 3. And here we can see this is what we found. So whenever they failed, so they had errors. So this is for every time the stimulus here, this is all number 3. Sometimes they press the button, sometimes they forgot not to press the button. And we can see this activity here before the stimulus. This is in frontal regions, because this is all over frontal regions. So there is definitely a difference when you're mind-wandering and you're not mind-wandering. So this is just to show that yes, we can measure this difference. And here you see it goes, the person was probably distracted for at least 10 seconds, because that's where the brain activity goes back to. You start to diverge basically about 10 to 12 seconds before the presentation of number 3 right here. What about other modalities? Well, here we have brainwave analysis. So we have a subject, we record their brainwaves, then we look at the amplitude of different brainwaves. We can also project that inside the subject brain to know where it comes from. And in this experiment, this is the one where I asked people to count their breath and press a button whenever they realized they were mind-wandering. And this is what we obtained. and I apologize for the complexity of that graph, but basically 0 is the time they press the button. And we said anything before 0, they were distracted, mind wandering, because by definition, they press a button whenever they realize they're mind wandering. Then everything after 0, they were back concentrated. And these are different brain waves. So you have delta, theta, alpha, beta. So these are different brain waves at different frequencies. So for example, theta is from about 5 hertz. So that's 5 oscillation per second. That's a brainwave at 5 oscillation per second. And what you can clearly see here, it is more red than right here after. So it means here we have more theta when the person is mind wandering when they're not mind wandering. And we can try to localize it within the brain. So this is just this projection on the basically the scalp. This is not, we're not localizing yet here, but we can see here, these are the ears of the subject. This is over the back of the head. So we can see all this activity in 5 hertz that is different between mind wandering and not mind wandering. In this paradigm, what we also did we had sounds. So as the subjects were doing the task, we also had the sound. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second. I'm going to share it again because I think I forgot to include the sound. Oh no, I have the sound. Okay. So you should hear that, but imagine you're just doing your breath counting and I just ask you to ignore this sound. So you have these sounds in the background. You don't see this visual. The visual is just for you to show that we have 2 types of sound. We have the standard, which are frequent, and we have the red ones, which are the oddball, and which are more rare. And when we have this type of sound, basically there's a very specific response of the brain. If you look at the brain response for standard and the brain response for what we call oddball, the rare one, we have a large deflection. So that's basically the surprise response of the brain. How is the brain surprised to see the oddball? And we were interested in studying that, and I'll tell you why in a second. We were interested in studying that when people were mind wandering. So here, this is when they press the button. So we said the 10 seconds before they press the button, they're mind wandering. The 10 seconds after they press the button, they're back into concentration. And you can see that every second we have these beep and boops in the background. And we have much more beeps than boops. So we define some standard during mind wandering, some oddball during mind wandering, and some standard after when they're concentrated, and some oddball when they're concentrated. And what we found is this, and that's for the standard and the oddball. When they were mind wandering, you see for both the standard and the oddball, we have a decrease in amplitude of the brain response. The brain response decreases for both the standard and the oddball. And our interpretation of this is that together with the results where we have more 5 hertz, is that when people are mind wandering, they're in this state of kind of drowsiness. It's very similar to drowsiness, or they're in a state of half sleep. So that's why in this paper, we concluded that mind wandering is a state of low alertness. And it might have something to do with, when you're asleep, you're recuperating. So mind wandering could be a state of micro sleep, where you just let your mind wander, and sometimes we call it daydreaming as well. It's a state of rest of the brain. It might also have something to do with when you're sleeping, there's all the waste products, basically, during of the day in the brain, which are being washed out. So maybe even there is a metabolic role for mind wandering as well. Anyway, this was a seminal paper we published in 2011, and one of the first on mind wandering and neuroscience imagery. Now, we did also other experiments. We did experiments when people were, we did experiment in India, in Rishikesh, at the Swami Rama Sadarka Grama Ashram. And this is, we had a bungalow where we could record some data. And we call this the Meditation Research Institute. And there's still some experience doing, still some experience right now, ongoing. And so what we did right there is that we were interested in comparing the mind wandering of different meditation tradition. So we had the Isha tradition, Vipassana tradition, and Himalaya tradition. I believe the Isha tradition is the Sadhguru tradition. I'm not sure. I don't remember. Yes. And so this was done in India. Lots of people traveled thousands of miles to come and do the experiments. We had more than 20 people in the Isha tradition, Vipassana tradition, Himalayan tradition, and then we also had control subjects. And here the goal was not to show one meditation is better than the other. The goal was more to show that there is some commonalities across meditation for both mind wandering and brain activity. And the reason is that in the meditation literature, people will talk of, they were doing meditation, Vipassana meditation, or Himalayan tradition meditation, which is mantra-based, or Isha meditation, but these are very different types of meditation. You have to be more precise when you do that. So in the literature, and that's still the case today, people would just refer to it as meditation, as if there was no difference between all these different states. So that's why we're interested in studying that. And what we found when we compared to controls is that we had this broad spectrum. So these are the brain waves at different frequencies. So 20 means 20 oscillations per second. And we had some difference early, but the most interesting difference was this broad spectrum change, meaning that all the high frequency, especially above 60 hertz, but even below 60 hertz, which we call gamma, the gamma frequency was higher in all the meditators compared to the controls. And this was during a period where we were asking them to not meditate, just mind wander, basically. So there seemed to be a structural change in their brain that triggers this. So in the subsequent experiment, which I'll come to in a second, we try to study meditators versus non-meditators and try specifically to characterize that difference in mind wandering. But this was reassuring to see that all the meditation, even though they come from different angles, seems to make similar brain changes. And this is the scalp topography. I'm not getting into the details, but they were similar for the different types of meditation compared to controls. And we published that also about 5 years ago. And this is the last experiments. I don't know how much time I have. Do you have 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So in this task, so this was probe cuts. So people were meditating and we just interrupted them every between 30 seconds and 90 seconds randomly. And we asked them 3 questions. Please rate the depth of your meditation right now. Please rate the depth of your mind wandering. Are you mind wandering? And we were explaining before what is mind wandering. And please rate also how tired you are. And we tested 24 subjects, 12 expert meditators and 12 novice meditators. And this is how it goes, basically. So you're meditating, and here at this specific point, a first question pop up: what's the depth of your meditation? Just out of the blue, you're meditating with your eyes closed. You have a keypad on your lap, and then you have to answer from 1 to 5 the depth of your meditation. As soon as you answer, the second question comes up, etc. When you're done with the first question, it says you can resume meditating now. So you resume meditating for one, sometimes up to 2 minutes and a half. And then you have another question, rate the depth of your meditation. At this point, you might be mind wandering. So you say, oh, okay, the depth of my meditation was low and I was mind wandering at that point. Just answering the keypad on your lap. You don't have to open your eyes. And then again, question pop up. So, this lasts about an hour. And so we can get enough data, because getting enough data is critical. And first, this is doable. You could say, well, this is going to be too disruptive for people's meditation, just like being distracted every minute and a half. But because they don't have to open their eyes, and because all the questions last less than 10 seconds, they just answer quickly. And they said this was not too disruptive to their meditation. So this is actually possible to do that. And also this is, we found some difference in the brain activity of mind wandering in the theta band compared to not mind wandering. So very similar to what I showed before. So these reinforce our previous results that you have more theta when people are mind wandering. And this is linked also to the idea of microsleep of some state. Then the other very important result we found was that these are the experienced practitioners, and you can see their response when they're meditating and they're mind wandering. So about 75% of the time they said they're meditating, and 25% they're mind wandering. Now, when we asked the novice, it was more 50-50. So what it tells us is that the people who are meditators, were expert meditators, are mind wandering less than the people who are novices. And this might sound obvious. Yeah, meditation practice allows you to gain more control over your mind and mind wander less. But it had never been shown before, that meditation in a controlled experiment, you can actually do a controlled experiment that shows that meditation does decrease mind wandering. So these are just the statistics. And yeah, we published that about 4 years ago. Then we published other papers on mind wandering and meditation, when the meditating mind wanders, etc. And then we also tried what we call neurofeedback, where what we did is that we asked people, okay, you're going to look at that screen right there, and you're going to try to control the color. And the color will be controlled with your theta band in real time. So here we can see a subject doing the task, and we ask them, okay, do this simple meditation technique and try to change the color of the square. So that's what they're doing right now. They're looking at the square, they're trying to change the color of the square with their brainwaves. So they're not meditating, they're just doing this neurofeedback, where they try to create a loop with the computer, trying to entrain their brain to change the color of the square to increase theta, which is the same that we observed in meditators when they were mind wandering. Oh, sorry, decreased theta, which is the opposite of what people were doing mind wandering. And the idea is that, does this influence, their mind wandering? So we had an MRI scan at the beginning, MRI scan at the end, and then they had several sessions over 2 weeks. Every day they were doing that. Every day they were trying to entrain their brain, basically. And that's what we showed, in that they're actually able to do that. They're actually able to entrain their brain. This is the neurofeedback group, and this is called a sham group. So the sham group was in front of the computer. They were trying to do exactly the same thing, but they were fed the brainwave of another subject. So, and they don't know it. And the reason we do that is that you can come to the lab, be very excited, and you're going to get results just because you're excited. So that's why we want to have a sham group and do double-blind experiments. What we found is that first they're able to entrain their brain after 8 sessions, but also there is a change in some behavior. We try mind-wandering tasks. We didn't find results in mind-wandering tasks, but we tried also this memory task, And we did find that the people who got the neurofeedback got better at this memory task. So it did increase, they got better at resolving cognitive conflict, which is also a trait that is shared with meditation. So this experiment shows that you can take the brainwave when you're mind wandering, trying to decrease these brainwaves and get results as if you were, not expert meditators, but as when you're meditating. And of course, there's just a hand waving arguments, and that's very simplified, but that's basically the gist of it. That we're able to show that by modulating this brainwave, we're able to maybe decrease some of the effect of mind wandering. Now, I want to briefly, in the 2 minutes, mention another aspect of our research, which is less conventional. But basically, when we study mind wandering, we wonder, where do thought come from? And the general in neuroscience, if you ask a neuroscientist, he will tell you, well, thoughts come from the brain. But there's alternative explanation where thought come from the global unconscious. We're not separate from our environments. Consciousness is primary, and it might be possible that thought come from we're more than our brain, basically. And that's basically scientific hypothesis I've been pursuing, that even during mind wandering or regular thinking, your thoughts might come from more than your brain. So in this model, so you are your brain. So either the answer is yes or no. If you're more than your brain, because if you are your brain, consciousness doesn't exist. Basically, consciousness is and a lot of scientists would think like that. They would think consciousness doesn't exist. I mean, it's unthinkable for me, but they would say, oh yeah, I don't exist. Then if you're not your brain, there's two hypotheses. So consciousness can be an epiphenomenon of the brain, basically arise from the brain. So all your thoughts might be epiphenomenon rising from the brain. And either you have free will or you have an absence of free will. And again, that comes from mind wandering. Where do thoughts come from? Do you will your thoughts, or are just thoughts popping up in your mind and you have no control over them, whether these are mind wandering thoughts or not? And so if you're more in your brain, if you have free will, again, there is two different hypotheses. One of them is, can your thoughts have have non-local nature to them, your consciousness, not necessarily your thoughts? And that's the hypothesis of psi. So in this model, consciousness is a fundamental property of nature, or maybe not. Maybe it just arises from brain activity, and you can have free will, but you might not have psi. So that's I'm personally, I favor this hypothesis, and I do lots of experiments which try to show that in meditators and non-meditators. And as my last slide here, I have a video of my Mathieu Ricard. That's about 2 minutes. I don't know if I have time to show this or not. I can just explain it otherwise. Do I have time to show this 2-minute video, or should I just explain the content?
Please go ahead, Arnie.
Okay. So this is, here he recalls one of his experiences. And Mathieu Ricard is the translator for the Dalai Lama. And I
want to just give one example, because when I was discussing with my philosopher father, he was a completely unbeliever, agnostic, anything you want. And he was, one of the first things he took me on was about this really stupid stuff about all what I've been talking about. And so I told him, look, I'll tell you a story, and then you make whatever you want out of it. But what I promise you is I'm not telling you lies. So, one day I was in my hermitage in Darjeeling, living with my teacher, and I used to come to see him every night for many years to, have teachings and so forth. And then one day I remember when I was a teenager, my uncle was in the seaside, and there's a lot of those rats that immigrated from America on ships that were destroying his pond. And he was a hunter, and he told me, why don't you go with a rifle and see if you find some rats. So I basically never hunted and didn't fish much, but somehow for some strange reason, I took that rifle and went there. I was 16 years old. So then one of the rat came and I shot, and the rat jumped. And I hope still now that I didn't really kill him. It was just surprise, but I don't know. In any case, when I was doing retreat, when I was 20 plus, and then one day that things came very clear in my mind. And I said, how could I ever conceive of doing something like that? Speak of lack of empathy. Not even imagine what it would be to be just a nice rat swimming there and someone just trying to kill. So unbelievable. So I could not believe that I had done something like that. And I said, well, I'm going to tell my teacher, sort of kind of confession. So at 5 o'clock, I went down on my hermitage, went to see my teacher. That time I didn't speak Tibetan, but his son was interpreting. And as usual, I sort of bowed down 3 times. And I looked at him and he was laughing at me, just heartily laughing, and telling something to his son. And when I came by, he said, how many animals did you kill in your life? He never ever asked me about my past, my youth, my stories. He knew I was coming, being an ex-scientist who decided to sort of live and receive teaching from him. He never asked me a question about my childhood of any kind. And at that very moment, he asked me that. And it looks very simple. It was not like suddenly there was some vibes and strange lights in the room. It was just like a nice joke. But just give me an explanation. I don't have one.
So this was, I believe, a couple of years ago in Denver at the Science and Contemplation meeting. And these are very prominent scientists. Here you have Wolfsinger at the Max Planck Institute, and here Evan Thompson, who is a famous philosopher. Anyway, this did quite a stir, and we do experiments trying to study this phenomena, telepathy, etc. Can the mind, the thoughts that pop up in your brain, can they come from outside your brain or not? And you can study these questions scientifically. So are we there yet? Not yet. There's still lots of research to do, and I can expand on that during the question. I want to thank my collaborator and thank you for listening. And also, I have a book coming up, Why Our Mind Wanders, and I think you can pre-order it on Barnes and Nobles, not yet on Amazon, but it's coming.
Thank you so much, Arnaud. That's wonderful. Go ahead, Tulsi. You're going to say something.
No, I was also going to echo, thank you. This was such an amazing introduction to what is mind wandering. And I think you broke it down really well for those who are maybe new to the science, and such a wide breadth of research that you are doing in this field. It's wonderful to know. There are actually quite a few questions already in the chat for you. If you don't mind me reading them out for you. Ethan has asked, what do you consider an expert meditator and what is a novice? Could you define that a little bit more, Dr. Delorme?
Yes, and we always try to have objective measurements. And so here, this was in terms of the number of hours that people have meditated. So we had a group, we'd had, I can't remember the exact number of hours, probably was like 5,000, at least 5,000 estimated hours that they had been meditating. And then the novice group, I think I had like less than 100 hours of meditating. So this is how we defined it, using objective measurements. I mean, we can, and of course, had its flaw, because even the person who was just starting to meditate, maybe they were taking hikes or something, they were doing another kind of meditation before, that they didn't call meditation, or, maybe they're just very, very, they had a propensity. So, it's not perfect, but, we need to, set, some objective threshold where we say, okay, this is an expert meditator and this is not an expert meditator.
Thank you for that insight. So I see another question from Amrita. Amrita, you're here with us. Do you want to ask your question yourself? You can unmute.
Thank you so much, Lucy. Hi, Dr. Delorme. I have been fangirling for a while. I have been using your EEGLAB. I had a question about fear and consciousness. So I am particularly interested in how traumatic memories impact these different, you said something specific about the frequency, the theta frequency. So let's say if somebody can predict what thoughts are coming, I have a hypothesis that may be impacted by their fear response. And particularly, I'm interested in how fear plays a part. Like, even if I have learned meditation, I might not be able to meditate, and my mind keeps wandering to what is salient. And in this case, it's the fear. So, and if I respond in a certain way, if somebody who wants to understand consciousness, I think that some of the things which I would be more interested to know is the limbic brain or the fear response brain. How does that maybe contribute to some of the changes in the EEG signals that you have observed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the fear, I mean, from my perspective, so you have, so some of the thoughts, like if you're meditating and then you have mind wandering, and a lot of it is linked to a specific fear, and you kind of, get stuck on these thoughts. Okay, I'm always mind wandering about this fear. From my perspective, and again, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, so it's just the neuroscientific perspective. But from my perspective, these are, there are networks in the brain. And as you think these thoughts, for me, it's like a virus in your mind, because, you think these thoughts, and then the neural network gets reinforced. And then you're going to think this thought more in the future, because you're reinforcing the neural network. Now, as far as recording during EEG, I don't have any data specifically about fear, but yeah, that's my hypothesis. My hypothesis is that, these fear and this compulsive thinking, any kind of compulsive thinking, is like a virus in your mind brain, where, they just feed themselves. And so there are techniques. Meditation helps, observing it helps, because, as you see the thought and you see, it's not you, and that you don't want that thought, really, this thought is knowing, and it's not me, you can let it go. And there are other techniques that, can be used. In my book, I have other, techniques, which are all issued from, Eastern practices and meditation, but, more specifically to address these thoughts, this kind of compulsive thoughts. How can you deal with them? How you can, reframe what they mean for you, and eventually let them go, because you realize they're not, that's not what you want. And when you realize that at a deep level, you're able to let it go. But I don't have neuroscientific data about that yet.
I really am looking for it.
Thank you.
Arnaud, I had a specific question to you. You talked
Yes.
about FNIRS in your work, right? Using that. So where do you use that? Is there a specific setting that you want to use that particular technology versus the EEG itself?
Well, so the FNIRS, functional near infrared spectroscopy, they're measuring the blood flow as opposed to the brain waves. So the brain waves we can measure with very high precision, down to 1/1000th of a second, or even better. but the blood flow, because the blood takes time to arrive to this brain area, it's the blood flow resolution is about at most a couple of times per second. So we don't have the same time resolution with FNIRS as with EEG. But there are other advantages. We have less noise in the data. Here I showed these results with FNIRS because these were like the obvious for an introduction to show, yeah, there is obviously some brain difference. You're mind wandering, you're not mind wandering. And this was a good introduction. Now the problem with our montage is that we could only say, okay, there's activation, there's difference in frontal region, because this is where we had our electrodes. And they are FNIRS system where you have electrodes all over the scalp. So you're able to localize better, the origin of the difference. So the EEG, the brainwaves, and the FNIRS, these are just two complementary techniques. One looks at the brain electrical activity, and one looks at change in blood flow. And of course, when you have brain area active, all the micro vessels dilates it, so you have more blood flow coming to this brain area. So the two are correlated in some way, but not not one-to-one. It's not an obvious correlation. So it's still good to have both method, both brainwave, FNIRS, or you can also use functional MRI, which are the big machine, that people go to check. Yeah.
So I have another follow-up question on that, is the depth of meditation, right? So what do you use as the index of depth of meditation objectively?
Oh, we just ask people, what's the depth of your meditation right now? So it's subjective. So you remember we had this diagram. So we have objective measures, which is just the brainwave, the functional NIRS, or we can ask people reaction time. Press a button whenever you see a number except number 3. So we have how fast they press the button. So we have the objective measures, and then we have the subjective measures. And so that's one of the subjective measures. And we ask them, compared to it's usually the question we asked them before, okay, rate yourself to compare, not to compare, but your best meditation ever compared to, your meditation during the day. Like rate from 1 to 5, the depth of meditation. Whenever the question pops up, just rate from 1 to 5, how, the depth of your meditation compared to the rest of the day. Basically, if you meditate several times a day, lots of these meditators, they meditated several times a day. So it was subjective.
In that experiment, you asked for subjectively, but is there a specific way, or we can say that somebody is deeply meditating versus someone else?
Yeah. So that's so what you do is that once you have this depth of meditation, and then you have the brain activity, then you can say, okay, what are the brain activity corresponding to the higher depth of meditation? And then when you detect, this pattern of higher depth of meditation, you can say, oh, this person is deeper in their meditation. But that would only work within subjects, meaning that, if we can do that on you, record your brain for, several, like couple of weeks, and, you press the button, depth of meditation today, etc. And then we record you again, and then we can say, okay, here your depth of meditation was probably that much. But we wouldn't be able to do that on a group of subjects, because the data, the EEG data, is too different between me and you, or any two individual. The EEG data is different. So there's not a signature for the depth of meditation that would easily be derived from everybody's EEG. It is more tailored. And, there's reason for that, which is the folding of our cortex is slightly different. So, projection of the EEG source on the scalp is going to differ. So there's technical reason why our EEG is all different. But usually, if we want to use brainwave or functional MRI to determine the depth of meditation, it would be on the subject, to subject. We would have to train the model to predict based on a person's brain activity, and it would be successful. I don't know if it has been done. I would have to double check the literature, but yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. We have Tulsi, go ahead.
Dr. Kestas, did you have a quick question?
Yeah, so this, your answer to Bala's question kind of partly answered my question, but you mentioned that you measure expertise in meditation by sort of hours of meditation or time spent. So are there any behavioral or neural measures that you consider reliable to distinguish expert meditators from, or alternatively, depth of meditation from novices?
Yeah, so in our paper, the one where we asked the question, you know, the prop caught one, we had people meditating and asked them these 3 questions. And then we had a group of expert meditators versus novices. We did find some difference, and difference in the frontal midline theta, so the theta rhythm. We did find difference between the 2 population of subjects. Now, now there's several explanations to this difference. It could be that people who have higher frontal midline theta are going to end up being long-term meditators, when the people who don't have, you know, that brain signature. So you could say, well, you know, they self-select, the subject self-select, and we just end up with a subpopulation. So it doesn't mean that meditation leads to higher frontal midline theta. It just means that the people who can meditate longer and decide to be long-term meditators have higher frontal midline theta. But there's other, what we call longitudinal studies, where you know, you take people who don't meditate and then you train them to meditate every I think for like up to 3 months, and then you test their brain before and after, and you look at the difference in their brain activity. And I can't remember exactly what they found in that case, but yeah, you can find some differences as well. As I mentioned, you know, our respective, the difference between 2 individuals is large. So whatever you can extract from group population is going to be very vague, you know, in quote. If you're studying the brain of an individual before training and after training, you're going to get much more specific and changes that you can interpret. Compare if you're trying to average across, you know, 20 or 100 individuals, it's going to be smeared out.
And what do you associate the higher midline theta activity? Is it the increased engagement of the anterior cingulate in cognitive control, or what?
I would say decreased engagement more than increased engagement. I mean, most of brain waves, especially in low frequency like alpha, theta, well, theta might be a little bit different, but you know, they're considered more like resting activity of the brain. Like, for example, alpha is well known that if I ask you to track a target in your visual field, the portion of your brain that doesn't process the target oscillate at alpha. So it's alpha deactivation, alpha decrease is better interpreted as your brain is at rest. Everybody's oscillating together, you know, nobody's processing information. Theta might be slightly different because it could be the carrier of you know, messages between different brain areas. But you can also consider that within a specific brain area, and as you said here, it would be you know, frontal midline theta probably corresponds to the anterior cingulate, is more linked to relaxation of activity in this region. So and in this specific region, frontal midline theta has been associated with memory. So for example, if I ask you to remember some numbers, like telephone numbers, the more number there is, the higher basically your frontal midline theta is. So there is some correlation between memory and frontal midline theta in the anterior cingulates. And you know, this, you can use this information to try to interpret what it means for meditators. it's linked also to executive functioning, and there's also different types of frontal midline theta. So it's not necessarily easy to interpret these results.
Thank you so much for your questions, Dr. Kestas, and thank you, Dr. Delorme, for taking the time to answer them so thoroughly. Unfortunately, we are a little bit out of time, and I see that there are more questions from the audience in the chat, but we'll have to get to them at another time, and we'll be sharing exactly when that can be in a few moments here. But first of all, just thank you so much, Dr. Delorme, for taking the time today to join us so early in the morning for you to share about this incredible topic. There's clearly a lot of interest, and there's much more that we can discuss about this. So we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us about your work today. And all of you who have joined us from across the world, Nasha is just going to share the screen now, but we are excited to invite you to come back and join us for a future talk. There are so many amazing research avenues that are being explored, and the next talk in our series coming up on June 12th is going to be on integrative health through music therapy, and thinking about how music and meditation can have maybe similar effects on our health and well-being. And sharing about that is Dr. Suzanne Hanser, who is part of the music therapy department at the Berklee College of Music, which is one of the most renowned music colleges in the world. So please make sure to register for this upcoming event. There is a lot more we have coming for you. Next slide, please. We also have a whole slate of wonderful programs that our center is doing to support patients with various medical conditions, including those with long COVID, with cancer, with Parkinson's disease, and also those who just want to go deeper on their wellness journey. So if you were inspired to try meditation from today's talk, these are some ways that you can engage or share about also with your community and see how you can bring meditation into your life in a deeper way. Next slide, please. And we are really, really happy to hear from you anytime. We know that many of you are looking forward to the recording of this talk to listen to some more of the details, and also to know about our upcoming events, any research finding and highlights about our center and the work that we're doing. Please make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. We send not more than 1 or 2 maximum emails in a month. And so we are excited to keep you updated. This is the easiest way to learn about all of our upcoming programs and events. Next slide, please. And this is what I have been so excited to share with you. You can actually engage with Dr. Arnaud Delorme in a much more meaningful and deeper way, because he's going to be one of our speakers at this conference, which is going to be Harvard's very first consciousness conference, where our center is collaborating with the Harvard Medical School to present a consciousness conference that is really looking at what is the science behind it, how does it relate to spirituality, and what are some ways that it has a social impact as well. And this is happening on October 26th and 27th here in Boston at the Harvard Medical School. So if you want to participate in this conference and attend and listen to speakers as amazing and insightful as Dr. Delorme was today, please definitely make sure to save the date and sign up on our newsletter so we can share with you as soon as the registrations open up any day now. And we also have, as part of the event, an incredible set of guest speakers, including Sadhguru with Steven Pinker, talking at the Harvard Sanders Theater. This is going to be a large public event, and we're really, really excited to hear these 2 great minds converse about the topic of consciousness. And then we also have joining us Helen Langevin, Deepak Chopra, Susan Bauer-Wu, and Rudolph Tanzi, amongst many other incredible experts and speakers. So with that, we're going to actually wrap up for today. I think the next slide is just another way for you to stay in touch with us on social media. So please follow us and connect with us on social media. This is another quick way, easy way to learn everything that's happening and stay in touch with all of our upcoming events. Thank you all so much for joining us and being engaged and participating. We really look forward to engaging with you all as we continue to grow our community. And please don't hesitate to reach out anytime via email. I'm sure if Dr. Delorme is open to hearing from you, Dr. Delorme, you can also share your email in the chat. And thank you again, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day.